Welcome. Tonight, we're taking a journey through time, across oceans and across continents, to visit some of the most hauntingly beautiful abandoned places in the world. From the ghostly ruins of Hashima Island in Japan, where thousands once lived above the sea, to the eerie remains of the Jemison Insane Asylum in Alabama, where silent halls still hold echoes of the past. From the vast Packard automotive plant in Detroit, once the pride of American industry, to the towering furnaces of Sloss in Birmingham, where fire and steel shaped a city's history. Each place tells a story of ambition and innovation, of community and struggle, of triumph and decline. But now they rest in silence, monuments to what once was, and reminders of how quickly time can change everything. So, settle in, relax, and let your mind wander as we uncover the histories, the memories, and the lingering mysteries of these forgotten worlds. This is more than just history. It's a journey through places where the past still whispers, waiting to be heard. Tonight, I invite you to travel with me to a place unlike any other. A place that looks more like the ruins of a fortress than a city. A place where the sound of the ocean echoes through hollow buildings, and the wind whispers stories of thousands of forgotten lives. This is Hashima Island, better known as Battleship Island, a small, rocky speck in the sea off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan. From afar, the island looks like a dark silhouette of a warship anchored in the water. That's how it earned its nickname. But this island is not a ship. It is a ghost city, built on rock, left behind decades ago, and slowly being reclaimed by time and the sea. Hashima Island once thrived with life. At its peak, more than 5,000 people lived here, crammed onto an island barely the size of 15 acres. It was one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Children played in narrow alleys, workers streamed into coal mines, families gathered in tiny apartments, and the glow of electric lights illuminated the night sky. But today there are no children, no families, no miners. Only abandoned concrete towers, collapsing walls, rusting steel, and silence. In this journey, we'll also wander through its myths, its controversies, its secrets, and its haunting beauty. So, relax, settle in, and let's begin this story of Battleship Island, a place frozen in time. Hashima was not always a city. In fact, for most of history, it was nothing more than a bare lump of rock in the East China Sea. The island is small, just about 480 meters long and 160 meters wide. Imagine a football field, stretched out, surrounded by deep water. That's Hashima. For centuries, the island was unremarkable. It had no forests, no rivers, no fields, only waves crashing against jagged rock. Local fishermen from nearby Nagasaki knew of it, of course, but it was not a place to settle. It was too harsh, too barren. But hidden beneath the rock was something valuable, something that would change Japan forever: coal. In the early 1800s, Japan was still a nation of samurai, rice farmers, and isolated villages. But the winds of change were blowing. Steam engines and modern ships needed fuel, and coal was the black gold of the age. The first discovery of coal on Hashima is credited to the early 1800s, but it was in 1810 that official records confirm coal mining began. At that time, the island belonged to the feudal lord of Saga Domain. Small-scale mining operations started, but nothing large. Everything changed when Mitsubishi, the powerful industrial company, purchased the island in 1890. Mitsubishi saw potential. They knew Japan's navy, its factories, its growing cities. Everything needed coal, and Hashima had coal beneath its seabed. To get to it, they built shafts that plunged deep below the island, some extending far out under the ocean floor. Imagine standing on Hashima. Beneath your feet, tunnels stretched like veins, reaching into the darkness, with miners chipping away by lantern light as the sea pressed above them. It was dangerous. Floods, collapses, and explosions were constant threats, but Mitsubishi was determined. And so, from a lonely rock, a city began to rise. When mining began in earnest, workers needed a place to stay. At first, wooden houses were built, but typhoons and storms battered the island constantly. Wood rotted, walls fell. So Mitsubishi tried something new. In 1916, they constructed Japan's first large reinforced concrete apartment block. It still stands today, crumbling but proud. This was the beginning of a new era. Soon, Hashima became a concrete fortress. Apartment blocks rose up, one after another. Schools, bathhouses, shrines, even a hospital, all crammed onto this tiny rock. Concrete walls were built around the island to shield it from the waves. These seawalls gave Hashima its battleship-like outline, earning it the nickname Gunkanjima, Battleship Island. By the 1950s, more than 5,000 people lived on Hashima, making it one of the most crowded places in the world. Imagine narrow alleyways, stacked apartments, clotheslines strung from balcony to balcony. Life here was unique. Everything a person needed was on the island. Schools, grocery stores, a cinema, even a small temple. Children played on rooftops. Families bathed in communal bathhouses. Workers went down into the mines in shifts, day and night. The island was isolated, but it was alive. By the mid-20th century, Hashima was no longer just an island of workers. It was a fully functioning city floating in the sea. But it was unlike any other city on Earth. Imagine waking up here in the 1950s. The sound of the ocean is ever present, waves striking against the concrete seawalls. The morning air smells faintly of coal dust and salt water. Narrow corridors between tall apartment blocks funnel the sea breeze like tunnels. Children's voices echo down stairwells as families stir awake. The apartments were small, very small. Most were just 2 or 3 rooms, barely enough for a family of 5. Furniture was compact, designed to fit into tight spaces. Privacy was rare, walls were thin, and neighbors could hear each other's daily lives through them. But despite the cramped quarters, the island had everything a community needed. There were schools for children, with chalkboards, playgrounds, and teachers who taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, while outside the windows, the waves rolled endlessly. There was a hospital, equipped with doctors and nurses to care for miners injured in accidents or residents sick from the humid air. There was even a cinema, where families could watch films together, a brief escape from the gray walls of concrete. Local grocery shops sold rice, vegetables, and fish brought in by boats from the mainland. Hashima even had its own pachinko parlor, where men would spend evenings playing the noisy pinball-like machines popular across Japan. There was a small shrine, too, where residents prayed for safety from typhoons and protection for miners descending into the dangerous shafts. The most important building for families was the bathhouse. On an island surrounded by seawater, fresh water was precious. Mitsubishi installed desalination equipment, but it was limited, so communal bathhouses became the center of daily life. Families would bathe together, scrubbing away coal dust, salt, and sweat. For children, life on Hashima was unique. They played in alleyways, in stairwells, and on rooftops. With so little space, the rooftops became playgrounds, gardens, and meeting spots. Looking out, they saw only the sea, stretching endlessly to the horizon. Many grew up never leaving the island except on rare trips to the mainland. And yet, despite the cramped living and isolation, residents often spoke fondly of the close-knit community. Everyone knew each other. Neighbors shared food, looked after one another's children, and gathered for festivals. The island might have been concrete and coal, but it was also home. But life above ground was only half the story. The true heart of Hashima lay beneath the waves, in the coal mines that spread like black arteries below the island. Miners descended deep into the earth, sometimes more than 1,000 meters down, and tunneled outward under the seabed. Imagine walking in darkness, hearing the creak of wood supports, the dripping of water, and the distant groan of the sea above your head. Work was brutally hard. Temperatures underground could soar to 30 or even 35 degrees Celsius, with humidity close to 95%. Miners wore little clothing, often just loincloths or thin shirts, their skins slick with sweat and coal dust. The work was dangerous. Tunnel collapses were common. Explosions from coal dust or methane gas could wipe out entire sections of the mine. Flooding was always a threat, with seawater pressing down from above. And yet, day after day, men descended into the mines. The reward was steady pay. Mitsubishi provided wages that supported entire families. In a post-war Japan where many struggled, a job on Hashima was seen as security. Still, it was a hard life, and workers often returned home exhausted, covered in black dust, their lungs slowly filling with coal particles. Some residents later recalled that you could always tell a miner by looking at his face, the lines, the weariness, and the faint trace of coal that never seemed to wash away completely. As much as Hashima was a place of community and livelihood, it also carried shadows. During World War II, as Japan's empire expanded, labor shortages meant that Hashima's mines were kept running by workers who had little choice. Historical records confirm that hundreds of Korean and Chinese laborers were brought here under forced conditions. Life for them was harsher still. They were given the most dangerous tasks, lived in worse quarters, and endured treatment that left scars long after the war ended. This is one of the more painful aspects of Hashima's history, one that is not always openly discussed, but which is essential to understanding the island's full story. Even after the war, ordinary residents faced hardships. Typhoons slammed into the island almost every year. Concrete walls held back the waves, but sometimes water surged through the streets, flooding apartments and carrying belongings out to sea. Food, too, was a constant concern. Everything had to be shipped in. If storms cut supply lines, residents would go without fresh produce or fish for days. Even fresh water was rationed during shortages. And yet, life went on. Festivals were held. Children still went to school, and the island endured. Despite the challenges, Hashima reached its golden age in the 1950s and 1960s. At its peak, around 1959, more than 5,200 people lived on this tiny island. To put that in perspective, the population density was over 80,000 people per square kilometer, far higher than even modern Tokyo. For a time, Hashima was a symbol of progress. Japan was rebuilding after the devastation of World War II, and coal powered its factories, its trains, and its navy. The island became a proud example of industrial strength. Workers' families grew accustomed to modern conveniences. Electric lights, running water, even television sets in some homes. Children dreamed of futures beyond the island, perhaps on the mainland, perhaps in new industries. There was a sense of hope, of forward momentum. The mines were dangerous, yes, but they provided stability. The island thrived, concrete buildings rising higher, walls expanding, life buzzing in narrow alleys and on windswept rooftops. For a brief moment in history, this small, rocky island in the East China Sea was one of the most remarkable communities in the world. Every empire, no matter how strong, eventually faces decline. For Hashima, that decline came not from a natural disaster or war, but from something much quieter, a shift in energy. For decades, coal had powered Japan. Trains ran on it, factories burned it, ships steamed forward with it. Hashima's very existence depended on coal being the lifeblood of modern life. But by the 1960s, the world was changing. Oil was cheaper, cleaner, and easier to transport. Japan, like many nations, began turning away from coal and toward petroleum. As oil grew in importance, coal mines across Japan started to close. The cost of extracting coal from under the sea at Hashima was high. The deeper the tunnels went, the more dangerous and expensive they became. The profits no longer justified the risks. For Hashima, this was the beginning of the end. During the 1960s and early 1970s, life on the island began to feel different. Shops closed one by one. The school still rang with children's laughter, but families whispered about leaving for the mainland. The once bustling cinema had fewer films showing. Workers still descended into the mines, but the number of shifts dwindled. Residents began to notice empty apartments. Once, every room had been filled, neighbors living wall to wall. Now, some buildings had dark windows, stairwells that echoed with silence. It was unsettling. For decades, Hashima had been crowded to the point of bursting. To see it begin to hollow out was like watching a living creature slowly weaken. And yet, those who stayed continued their routines. Children studied. Women shopped for food brought in by boats. Miners descended into the shafts. The island endured, even as its purpose slipped away. In 1974, the end came suddenly. Mitsubishi, which had owned and operated the island for nearly a century, announced that the Hashima coal mine would close permanently. Oil had fully replaced coal, and the company saw no reason to keep the costly operation running. For the residents, the news was devastating. Imagine living your entire life on Hashima, being born there, going to school there, building your family there, only to be told you had to leave. The island was home, even if it was harsh and cramped. Now, that home would vanish. Families packed up their belongings, furniture, bedding, clothes, toys. All were loaded onto boats. In many cases, people left behind things they could not carry: pianos, bicycles, bookshelves. Some even left dishes on tables, as if planning to return. But no one ever did. In the spring of 1974, the last residents stepped onto boats and sailed away. The island, once alive with thousands of voices, fell silent. On Hashima, time seemed to freeze. Apartments stood as they had been left, calendars still hanging on walls, shoes lined neatly by doors, toys scattered in corners. Shops sat stocked with goods no one would ever buy. Schoolrooms still had chalk dust on their blackboards. But the sea does not forgive. Without people to maintain the buildings, nature began its slow reclamation. Typhoons tore at roofs. Rainwater seeped into cracks. Salt spray ate away at exposed steel. Concrete walls began to crumble. Staircases collapsed. Windows shattered. By the 1980s, the island was already a ruin. Vegetation, once absent from the concrete fortress, began to creep into cracks. Moss spread across walls. Vines took hold where families once hung laundry. From a distance, Hashima looked like a battleship wrecked at sea, its towers hollow, its decks broken. It had transformed into something new, not a thriving city, not an industrial hub, but a ghost island. As the years passed, Hashima became shrouded in mystery. Fishermen passing by would tell stories of the abandoned city, claiming it was haunted by the spirits of miners who had died in the tunnels. Others said they could hear children's laughter carried by the wind across the waves. Some urban explorers dared to sneak onto the island, describing eerie sights: rusted bicycles leaning against walls, pianos left behind in classrooms, old televisions collecting dust. Many said the atmosphere was oppressive, as if the walls themselves held memories of the people who once lived there. Because Hashima had been sealed off by Mitsubishi after its closure, very few outsiders saw it for decades. Photographs of the island's ruins were rare. This secrecy only added to its legend. To the outside world, Battleship Island became a symbol of something strange and forgotten, a city built on rock, abandoned overnight, left to decay in silence. It is fascinating to think about how quickly nature reclaims what humans abandon. On Hashima, the battle is constant. Salt water eats away at steel beams. Humidity crumbles plaster. Typhoons tear through open windows, slamming doors off hinges. Yet plants push through cracks. Grass grows where children once played. Trees sprout on rooftops. Birds nest in empty windows. The island is now half human ruin, half natural wonder. A reminder that no matter how strong our walls or how mighty our machines, time and nature always win. For almost 20 years after its abandonment, Hashima sat in silence. The island was closed off, owned by Mitsubishi, and access was forbidden. Rust spread, walls collapsed, and storms battered its defenses. But the image of Hashima, its crumbling concrete towers rising from the sea, was too haunting to ignore. Photographers, journalists, and eventually filmmakers began to take an interest. In the 1990s, the first images of the decaying city began circulating in magazines and newspapers. The world was captivated. A city with no people, left exactly as it was in 1974, slowly falling apart. Explorers described the eerie feeling of stepping into apartments where calendars still hung on walls, where televisions sat on dusty floors, and where shoes rested by the door, as if the families had just stepped out. Soon, Hashima gained a reputation not just in Japan, but internationally. It was no longer just a ruin. It was a symbol of the modern world's fragility. Hashima's haunting appearance made it irresistible to filmmakers, game designers, and storytellers. In 2012, the island reached global fame when it was used as inspiration for the villain's lair in the James Bond film Skyfall. While the movie scenes were recreated on a set, the design was unmistakably modeled on Hashima's fortress-like silhouette and crumbling interiors. For millions of viewers worldwide, this was their first glimpse of Battleship Island. But even before James Bond, Hashima had appeared in Japanese films, manga, and anime. Its ghostly ruins made it the perfect setting for stories of mystery and survival. In video games, too, the island appeared, sometimes under different names but always recognizable. Games like Call of Duty and Battlefield drew inspiration from its concrete blocks and ruined streets. Documentaries followed. Filmmakers and historians traveled to the island, capturing its eerie silence, its collapsing staircases, its ghostly corridors. Each project added to Hashima's legend, showing it not only as a ruin, but as a monument to industrial history. In 2009, part of Hashima was reopened to the public. Tour boats began taking visitors from Nagasaki out to the island, where they could walk along a designated path and view the ruins safely from behind barriers. This was the first time ordinary people could set foot on the island in decades. Tourists described the experience as surreal, standing among hollow concrete towers, hearing waves echo through empty streets, imagining the thousands who once lived there. Then in 2015, Hashima was officially recognized by UNESCO as part of Japan's Sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution. This designation marked it as a place of global historical importance, highlighting its role in Japan's rapid modernization during the 19th and 20th centuries. But the recognition also sparked controversy. Critics pointed out that the island's history of forced labor during World War II was not always emphasized in tourist materials. For some, Hashima represents not only progress, but also the suffering of those who had no choice but to work in its dangerous mines. Today, tours include mention of that darker history, but the debate continues. Hashima remains a place of pride for some and pain for others. Hashima now exists in two worlds. In the physical world, it is a ruin, a decaying island fortress where concrete crumbles, staircases collapse, and waves gnaw at its walls. Visitors can only see part of it, since most buildings are too unsafe to enter. But in the cultural world, through films, games, photos, and stories, it has become something larger than itself, a stage for imagination, a reminder of both human ambition and fragility. It is at once a monument to progress, a warning of hubris, and a haunting dream of a city left behind. Beyond the grand history, Hashima is full of small, fascinating details that many people don't know. The first reinforced concrete apartment block in all of Japan was built here in 1916. This was years before Tokyo or Osaka had similar buildings. In a way, Hashima was a testing ground for Japan's modern architecture. At its peak, Hashima had a population density higher than Manhattan. More than 5,000 people squeezed into a space less than 16 acres in size. Families lived in units so small that children often did their homework in stairwells or on rooftops. The island had rooftop gardens, created by families who missed green spaces. On an island of pure concrete, a single plant was a treasure. Residents carried soil over from the mainland, bucket by bucket, to grow vegetables and flowers. Despite the cramped conditions, the island had a lively culture. Schools, shops, a pachinko parlor, barbershops, even a small temple. Residents celebrated festivals by stringing lanterns through narrow alleys, the glow of paper lights reflecting off the concrete walls. During storms, waves sometimes crashed so high that they overtopped the seawalls, flooding streets. Residents recalled seeing seawater pour into stairwells and lower floors, as if the ocean was trying to reclaim the island. When the island was abandoned, residents left in such a hurry that many belongings remained. Old photos, toys, and household goods still sit inside decaying buildings to this day. Explorers have found everything from typewriters to sewing machines, left to rust in silence. Although the island is silent now, its memories live on in the people who once called it home. Some residents recall the sense of community that defined daily life. With everyone living so close, neighbors became like extended family. Doors were often left unlocked, and children wandered freely between apartments. If a child misbehaved, it was not unusual for another adult, someone else's parent, or even a teacher, to correct them gently. Everyone felt responsible for everyone else. Others remember the soundscape of the island. In the mornings, the island was alive with clattering footsteps, the hum of machinery, the calls of shopkeepers selling food, the shrieks of children playing. At night, you might hear the faint roar of the sea outside the seawalls, mixed with the echo of laughter from the pachinko parlor, or the murmur of a family listening to the radio together. Former students describe climbing up to the rooftops of apartment blocks, where they could feel the wind whip across their faces. Some rooftops were turned into gardens, others into playgrounds. For many children, these rooftops were their world, high above the endless sea, looking out at nothing but horizon. One former resident recalled that despite the lack of space, life never felt lonely. On Hashima, you were never alone. Even if you tried, you could hear your neighbors through the walls, smell their cooking drifting into your room, hear their radios playing softly. Privacy was rare, but connection was everywhere. When the island closed in 1974, many of these same residents cried as they boarded boats for the mainland. Some had never lived anywhere else. To them, leaving Hashima felt like leaving behind not just a home, but a piece of themselves. Now, when you visit Hashima, that warmth and noise are gone. The streets are empty. Apartments are hollow shells, their walls broken open to the wind. Hallways are filled with shadows. Rust streaks down concrete walls like tears. Walking through, you hear only the sea, the same waves that once brought life to the island, now gnaw at its edges. The same winds that once carried children's laughter now whistle through shattered windows. It is as if the island holds its breath, waiting for life to return, but knowing it never will. Hashima is more than just a ruin. It is a symbol, a reminder of both human achievement and human limits. It shows us what we can build when we push the boundaries of engineering. From a bare rock in the sea, people created one of the most advanced, densely populated cities of its time. They built schools, shops, homes, and families on a speck of stone surrounded by waves. But Hashima also shows how quickly progress can fade. When coal lost its value, the island was abandoned almost overnight. What was once thriving became silent. Concrete, once thought indestructible, now crumbles. It is a reminder that human ambition, no matter how strong, is always temporary. Nature waits patiently, and in the end, it always returns. So tonight, as we finish our journey through Battleship Island, imagine standing at its edge. The sea stretches endlessly before you. The wind carries the scent of salt, and the ruins rise like a fortress behind you. You can almost hear the echoes of children playing, the clang of miners' tools, the soft laughter of families gathered in tiny apartments. And then, just as quickly, the sound fades, leaving only the ocean. Hashima Island is many things: a monument to Japan's industrial age, a memory of hardship and community, a symbol of ambition and of impermanence, a ghost city reclaimed by the sea. As you drift into sleep, let the story of Hashima remind you of the beauty in silence, the poetry in decay, and the strange peace of places left behind. The waves continue to crash against the seawalls. The concrete towers continue to crumble, and the island waits, silent, timeless, and eternal. We will now segue into the story of the place neglected by the government who held the reins at the time of its life, the Jemison Insane Asylum, located in Alabama. We will then move into the broad history of the Packard automotive plant and cap the night off with the dark history of Sloss Furnace, located in Birmingham, Alabama. Thanks for joining us. On the quiet banks of the Black Warrior River in Northport, Alabama, stands a building that holds more secrets than most small towns ever could. Locals know it by many names: Jemison Asylum, Bryce Hospital's dark sister, or simply the Old Asylum. Once a place of hope for mental health reform, it became a symbol of overcrowding, abuse, and tragedy. Today it sits as a decaying reminder of the way society once treated the mentally ill. This is the full story of the Jemison Insane Asylum, how it came to be, the lives within its walls, why it ultimately shut down, and the lingering shadows it left behind. The story begins in the mid-1800s. Mental health care in Alabama was nearly non-existent. Those considered insane were often locked away in county jails, left in poorhouses, or simply abandoned by families who had no means of care. In 1849, reformer Dorothea Dix traveled through Alabama, campaigning for the humane treatment of the mentally ill. Her influence reached Alabama's legislature, leading to the construction of Bryce Hospital in Tuscaloosa in 1852. Bryce would become the flagship institution for the state. But as the decades passed, Alabama's population grew, and so did the number of patients. Bryce quickly became overcrowded, housing far beyond its intended capacity. The state needed more space. That's when the Jemison Asylum was conceived, built just across the river in Northport. The asylum was named for Robert Jemison Jr., a wealthy Tuscaloosa businessman, politician, and philanthropist. Jemison had long advocated for modern infrastructure in Alabama and supported public projects like roads, railroads, and yes, institutions. His name was attached to the hospital not because he ran it, but because of his political and financial influence in securing it. From the outside, the Jemison Asylum was an imposing structure: red brick walls, barred windows, sprawling grounds. Inside, however, life was far from the serene picture administrators painted. In its early years, the asylum followed the moral treatment philosophy. Fresh air, farm work, and structured routines were thought to heal troubled minds. Patients tended gardens, cooked meals, and maintained the grounds. But by the early 20th century, overcrowding turned the institution into something darker. Designed for only a few hundred, the hospital often housed more than double its capacity. Men, women, and children with vastly different conditions, from depression to schizophrenia, epilepsy to simple unruliness, were lumped together. Reports began surfacing of neglect, poor sanitation, and mistreatment. Patients slept in cramped wards, often restrained for long periods. Medical practices were primitive by modern standards: hydrotherapy, insulin shock treatments, and even lobotomies in later years. For many, Jemison wasn't a hospital, it was a prison. Families often dropped off loved ones and never returned. Paperwork labeled them permanent residents, sealing their fate inside the walls of Jemison. By the mid-20th century, Alabama's mental health system was crumbling. Bryce and Jemison hospitals were notorious for their conditions. In 1970, a young attorney named George Dean filed a lawsuit on behalf of a patient, Ricky Wyatt. The case, Wyatt v. Stickney, would change mental health care forever. Although Wyatt was technically filed against Bryce Hospital, Jemison was implicated as well. The lawsuit exposed shocking truths: underfunding, understaffing, and inhumane treatment. Judge Frank M. Johnson ruled that mental patients had a constitutional right to adequate treatment. This was groundbreaking, the first ruling of its kind in the United States. The Wyatt Standards, as they became known, forced institutions across the country, including Jemison, to raise their standards. But for Jemison, it was too late. The hospital was outdated, its reputation permanently stained. In the following years, Alabama began deinstitutionalizing, moving patients into community programs instead of massive asylums. One by one, the buildings emptied. By the late 20th century, Jemison closed its doors. After its closure, the Jemison Asylum became a haunting landmark. The empty halls echoed with decades of suffering, and the building fell into disrepair. Nature crept in, vines through broken windows, birds nesting in patient wards. Locals began swapping ghost stories. Some claimed to hear footsteps in the abandoned corridors. Others swore they saw shadowy figures in the windows at night. Urban explorers snuck inside, documenting the graffiti, the old hospital beds, and the crumbling walls. But beyond the ghost stories lies a very real history. The asylum reminds us of how far mental health care has come, and how far it still needs to go. Today, the Jemison Asylum stands as both a ruin and a monument, Preservationists have debated saving the structure, but costs are high and interest is limited. Many argue it should be preserved as a historical site, a reminder of the struggles and reforms born within its walls. The legacy of Jemison is complicated. On one hand, it represents neglect, mistreatment, and tragedy. On the other, it played a role in sparking reforms that benefited patients across the country. If there's one lesson Jemison leaves us with, it's that society must always guard against forgetting the humanity of those who struggle with mental illness. The asylum's crumbling walls may fade, but the stories of those who live there must not. So next time you pass through Northport, Alabama, and see the ruins of the Jemison Asylum, remember, it's more than just an abandoned building. It's a chapter of history written in pain, resilience, and change. This has been the story of the Jemison Insane Asylum. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Alabama's hidden past. On the east side of Detroit, where East Grand Boulevard stretches like a scar across the city, stands one of the largest abandoned factories in the world, the Packard Automotive Plant. Once, it was alive with noise. Machines pounded, sparks flew, tens of thousands of workers moved in rhythm, producing some of the finest automobiles in America. The air smelled of hot oil and iron. Today, those same halls echo only with silence. Broken windows stare out like hollow eyes, ceilings sag, walls crumble beneath layers of graffiti. Nature has begun to reclaim what man abandoned. For more than a century, the Packard plant has stood as a symbol of innovation, of decline, and of the complicated legacy of Detroit. Tonight, let us take a slow journey. We will not rush. We will walk through the ruins, we will feel the history beneath our feet, and we will hear the whispers of a factory that built both cars and legends. The story begins in 1903. James and William Packard, ambitious car makers from Ohio, sought a factory worthy of their vision. They turned to Albert Kahn, the great industrial architect of Detroit. Kahn's innovation, reinforced concrete, allowed for enormous open spaces, sunlight streaming through wide windows, and strong floors that could hold heavy machines. From a modest start, the plant grew year after year. Eventually, it stretched across 3.5 million square feet, a city within a city. Inside, more than 40,000 workers plied their trades: engineers, machinists, upholsterers, welders. Packard was an innovator, responsible for the modern steering wheel and famous for smooth, powerful engines. To own a Packard was to own prestige. Presidents, generals, and movie stars drove them. The plant became the beating heart of Detroit's rise as the Motor City. When World War II began, Packard turned from luxury to necessity. Here, inside these vast halls, the company built the Packard V1650, a licensed version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It powered the P-51 Mustang, the fighter plane that helped secure Allied victory. The plant roared day and night. Workers spoke of the pride they felt, knowing the machines they built were not just cars for the road, but engines of freedom for the skies. Detroit became the arsenal of democracy, and Packard was one of its most vital weapons. But glory fades. When the war ended, America changed. Families moved to the suburbs. Car ownership shifted from luxury to practicality. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler dominated the new market. Packard, once untouchable in prestige, struggled to adapt. Its attempt to build mid-price cars diluted the brand's image. Sales dropped. Quality suffered. By the mid-1950s, Packard's survival depended on merging with Studebaker. But Studebaker itself was financially unstable. Instead of saving Packard, the merger dragged both into crisis. By 1956, Detroit production stopped, and by the early 1960s, the Packard name was gone forever. The once busy plant fell into silence. Let's pause here. Picture yourself standing in one of the empty offices overlooking the factory floor. The glass is cracked. A filing cabinet is overturned. Papers, once blueprints and production schedules, scatter across the dust. What was once order and efficiency has collapsed into stillness. The workers are gone, the machines are gone, and yet the building remains as if waiting for them to return. The Packard plant never disappeared. Through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, small businesses occupied parts of the complex. Storage companies, a chemical works, a warehouse or two. But each one eventually left, unable to tame the vastness of this decaying giant. By the late 1990s, the plant was fully abandoned. And yet, it was never truly empty. Graffiti artists found canvases on its endless walls. Photographers ventured into its broken corridors to capture its haunting beauty. Underground raves filled its dark spaces with the pulse of music, lights flashing against peeling paint. Even the famous artist Banksy left his mark on these walls. The Packard plant became more than just a ruin. It became a symbol of Detroit's decline, of urban decay, of the impermanence of industry itself. Stand here in the vast central hall. The roof is gone in places. Sunlight pours through gaps, painting stripes across the floor. Weeds sprout from cracks in the concrete. A tree grows where once an assembly line stood. Listen closely. You can almost hear the echoes, the hammering of steel, the voices of workers, the heartbeat of a city now long faded. In 2013, hope returned. A developer purchased the plant for just over $400,000. His vision: to transform this ruin into a vibrant community of shops, apartments, and event spaces. But the dream was too big, the costs too high, the problems too many. Environmental contamination, structural instability, financial setbacks. The years passed, and the plant continued to crumble. By 2021, the city of Detroit had lost patience. It declared the site a public nuisance. Court orders followed. The dream of revival was gone. In 2022, the demolition began. Bit by bit, the great factory fell. Walls that had stood for over a century collapsed into dust. By 2023, much of the plant was gone. By 2025, only fragments remained. 2 historic buildings were spared, their future uncertain. The rest, erased. The Packard plant tells us something about ourselves. It tells us how quickly greatness can rise. It tells us how even the strongest structures fall. It tells us how memory clings to ruins, long after life has left. As we leave this place, look back one last time. See the broken windows catching the last light of day. See the weeds curling up toward the sky. And hear the silence. For within that silence is the story of Detroit itself. This was the Packard automotive plant, a place of steel, a place of dreams, and now a place of ghosts. We are now going to switch gears and discuss one of the most haunted industrial sites in the entire country. In the heart of Birmingham, Alabama, sits a monument to fire, iron, and memory. A place where glowing furnaces once lit up the night sky, and where today silence and shadows reign. This is Sloss Furnaces, once a symbol of progress, now a towering relic of America's industrial age. But Sloss is more than just an abandoned factory. It's a place of stories, of men who labored in unbearable heat, of fortunes built on iron and steel, and of whispers. Whispers of things that cannot easily be explained. Tonight, we'll step inside its gates. We'll explore its history, how it became abandoned, why it still stands, and the legends that give it a reputation as one of the most haunted industrial sites in the United States. To understand Sloss, we must go back to the late 1800s. Birmingham was a young city, founded after the Civil War in 1871. It was no accident. Beneath the red clay of Alabama lay rich veins of iron ore, limestone, and coal, the 3 ingredients needed to make iron. Few places in the world had all 3 in such abundance, so close together. Businessmen saw opportunity. Among them was Colonel James Withers Sloss, a Southern industrialist who believed Birmingham could rival Pittsburgh as the steel capital of America. In 1881, he founded the Sloss Furnace Company. A year later, the furnaces roared to life, belching fire and smoke into the Alabama sky. Imagine standing here in the 1880s, the air thick with soot, the ground trembling as molten iron poured into sand molds. Railroads snaked across the land, hauling raw ore to the blast furnaces. Day and night, the city pulsed with the rhythm of industry. Sloss furnaces quickly became the beating heart of Birmingham's economy, producing thousands of tons of pig iron each year. Pig iron that built railroads, bridges, skyscrapers. Pig iron that fueled America's rise. But for those who worked here, Life was anything but glorious. The furnaces were hot, unbearably hot. Temperatures often soared above 120 degrees inside the casting sheds. Workers toiled around molten rivers of iron, where one misstep could mean instant death. Most of the laborers were poor immigrants or African-American men seeking work after the Civil War. They were paid little, worked long shifts, and endured conditions that would be unthinkable today. There were stories of men collapsing from heat exhaustion, of accidents where iron spilled like fire, swallowing everything in its path. Some never walked away from their shifts. The furnaces seemed alive, monstrous even, a fiery beast that demanded endless human sacrifice to keep the city alive. Still, the men kept working because they had no choice. For decades, Sloss furnaces thrived. By the early 1900s, Birmingham was booming, called the Magic City for how fast it had grown. Skyscrapers rose downtown, rail lines multiplied, and Sloss iron was shipped across the country. But with time, the world changed. New technologies, safer working conditions, and modern steel mills outpaced Sloss. By the 1960s, the once mighty furnaces were obsolete. In 1971, after nearly a century of operation, Sloss furnaces shut down. For the first time in almost 100 years, the fire went out. After the closure, the furnaces sat in silence. Rust began to creep across the iron structures. Vines crept up the walls. Wind whistled through broken windows and hollow pipes. For a while, demolition seemed certain. Why keep an old, rotting factory? But locals fought to preserve it. In 1981, Sloss Furnaces was designated a National Historic Landmark, the only blast furnace site in America ever to earn that honor. And so, it remained. A museum of industry, a monument to fire, but also a place of mystery. Sloss is not just remembered for iron, it's remembered for the stories. Workers claim to hear voices in the shadows, to feel hands on their shoulders when no one was there, to see figures moving among the pipes and towers. One of the most infamous legends is that of James "Slag" Wormwood, a foreman in the early 1900s. They say Slag drove his men mercilessly, forcing them to work 12-hour shifts in deadly heat. Dozens were injured, some killed. Then, one day, Slag himself fell into the furnace. Whether it was an accident, suicide, or something darker, no one knows. Since then, workers and visitors alike claim to see his ghost, a dark figure with glowing eyes, shouting at them to get back to work. There are also tales of screams echoing at night, of phantom footsteps across catwalks, of sudden blasts of heat where no fire burns. Some say it's just the wind, the creaks of an old factory. Others believe it's something more. Even paranormal investigators have visited Sloss, recording strange voices and unexplained movements. Today, it's considered one of the most haunted places in America. Today, Sloss Furnaces is no longer abandoned. It's preserved as a museum, open to visitors who want to see the massive furnaces, casting sheds, and towering smokestacks. But its reputation as a haunted site has only grown. Each year, it hosts haunted house attractions and ghost tours. People come from across the country to experience its eerie atmosphere. It stands as a reminder of both the power of industry and the cost paid by those who worked inside. Sloss Furnaces is more than an industrial ruin. It is a story of fire, of labor, of ghosts both real and imagined. It tells us about ambition, about struggle, about how progress is never free. And as the furnaces stand silent against the Birmingham sky, one thing is certain: the echoes of Sloss will never fully fade away.